The Immortal Billy Joel is the 5th episode of Season 8 of 2.5 Men. This is directed by James Widdoes, and as always there will be spoilers from now as I go through the episode chronologically and share some thoughts. It's a great episode. We have some great Alan moments, definitely quite a funny episode. It starts off with Jake needing a check for school, and Alan does everything he can to give Jake the check while trying to make sure he can't cash it in. Charlie then comes into the kitchen and Alan's head is on the table. He has just completely given up. And then Charlie reveals that he's just received a check for a decent amount of money, so Alan's head goes back to the table. Sometime later, Berta comes into the kitchen. Alan's head is still on the table, and Berta tells him a story, and then his head goes back on the table. Me repeating that multiple times doesn't make it sound very funny, but I just feel like the more it happened, the funnier it was. It was just such a subtle thing. I think also if you can relate, if you've ever been in that mind frame where all you want to do is just put your head on a table and forget about everything, I think it's quite relatable, so I found it to be quite funny. And then Alan tries to take a nap, and he ends up losing a war with the fold-out bed, so he goes to Charlie's room, which was a terrible idea, and he watches himself pretending to have sex on the TV because Charlie's got cameras everywhere, and we have kind of a double dose of embarrassment, one after the other. The pacing was great because Alan is obviously watching himself, but then Jake appears in the doorway, catching Alan doing this, which in itself was embarrassing for Alan, and obviously Alan wants to know what Jake wants. And Jake just told him he was on the TV downstairs, which I can't even imagine what Jake must have been thinking when Alan just popped up on the television downstairs. So kind of a double dose of embarrassment for Alan there. It's definitely not Alan's day. We're then in Charlie's hotel room as he was planning on going off to Vegas with this money, and I like the fact that we were being led to believe one thing when in actuality something else was true, because it seems like Kendra, played by Sara Sanderson, is actually an adult worker, and she's dressed as a nurse. And then maybe 30 seconds later, maybe a minute, in comes an actual doctor. And this is Dr. Schenkman, played by Steve Hytner. And it turns out that Charlie's actually there for a mild procedure. And I like the fact that we were being tricked into thinking that Kendra was not a real nurse, shall we say. And it worked really, really well. Judith then picks up Jake, and Alan is now wearing Charlie's clothing, which is... Alan seems to be not having a great time of it, but it was quite interesting to see just kind of, had John Cryer been cast as Charlie, it's kind of a glimpse of what that might have looked like, and it was an interesting moment. And then Alan decides to go to a bar with Charlie's money, and he introduces himself as Charlie Harper. We'll come back to that in a moment. We're then back at Charlie's room, and Evelyn wakes him up with quite an interesting appearance. She apparently got a deal on a face peel because she'd recommended Dr. Schenkman to Charlie. So Charlie, I think Alan's having a worse time than Charlie, but things seem to turn around for Alan because he takes his date back home. This is Gretchen, played by Erinn Hayes. Did I mention that? I don't think so. And he takes Gretchen back home, and he's still keeping up this pretense that he is Charlie, this is his beach house. And then he plays on the piano at her insistence because obviously he had told her that he'd earned all of this money from writing jingles. And he plays a song that, well, I was going to say I'd never heard of it before, but that's not true because I've seen this episode. But I haven't heard it in a long time. And it's We Didn't Start the Fire by Billy Joel. And the song mentions Doris Day. So I was pretty happy. And it sounded like a pretty decent song. And then I didn't see this coming. As I said, I'd seen this a long time ago, couldn't remember exactly what happened, did not expect Gretchen to turn around and say, "How long are you going to pretend to be Charlie Harper?" Which is not actually that far-fetched that she knew this, because as we know, Charlie has picked up a lot of women over time. It's not unrealistic that Alan would go to the bar Charlie frequents and picks up a woman that Charlie has met before. And she's fine with it. She's actually interested. She's turned on by role-playing. And we'll come back to that in a second. And I think if anybody were to predict what happens next with that part of the story, I'd be very, very, very surprised. Meanwhile, Nurse Kendra wakes Charlie up and he had breasts. Obviously, it was a dream, or I guess maybe a nightmare for Charlie. It was fine. It was a nice way to cut back to Charlie, but I don't think it added very much to the story, and I didn't think it was tremendously funny, but it was fine. It only took a couple of seconds. It also allows us, those couple of seconds, to build a bit of suspense for the reveal of what happens next, because Alan is in bed and Gretchen's in the bathroom getting ready for this role play, and he asks her about this role play, and she emerges from the bathroom very 1940s German. I don't know if I can say the actual words on YouTube, but certainly, as I said, I don't think anybody would have predicted that. It was quite a reveal. And then we cut to the following day, and Charlie comes home. His eyes are black from the procedure, and he tries to lie to Alan, of course, but Alan knows because of Evelyn. And Alan turns around in the kitchen, and he has a very dictator-esque mustache. Again, I'm not sure if I can say certain names without getting demonetized, but he has a very 1940s German classic dictator mustache. And it turns out that Charlie knew what Alan had been up to because, of course, he'd been with Gretchen and was aware of this fantasy that she has. And there we end things. A pretty funny ending. And definitely, well, quite a wild ride for both of the Harper brothers over the last few days. I really thoroughly enjoyed this episode. I think it has a lot to offer. I think Alan in particular was very funny. His part of the story was just brilliant. I enjoyed every aspect of it. Charlie's part of the narrative was quite good. I think there was a lot of deceit. We were being made to believe certain things, being made to believe he was going to Vegas for a wild weekend, being made to believe that Kendra was actually a real nurse, and of course being made to believe that he'd had breasts implanted during the procedure, although I assume people quickly would realise that that was part of the dream and not part of reality. But it worked really well. I enjoyed it. I have absolutely no complaints about this episode. The Immortal Mr. Billy Joel is a really solid, definitely very amusing episode of 2.5 Men.